What if the grand narratives of history, the stories of great men and pivotal battles, what if they aren't really what define our world?
Hmm.
What if the real essence, the sort of deeper truth of being human, is actually hidden in the quiet, everyday moments? And maybe in those huge, almost invisible forces that shape us all, often without us even realizing it.
That's a powerful question to start with.
Well, today we're not just talking about a novel. We're really embarking on this unique philosophical journey. It's a
Hmm.
deep dive into Leo Tolstoy's massive work, War and Peace.
Right. And this isn't going to be just a plot summary, though the plot is epic.
Definitely.
We're looking at the novel as, well, a lens Tolstoy used to examine these huge questions about history, about human agency. Do we have free will? And that
Wow.
constant search for meaning we all seem to be on.
So we'll get into the author's own life, which is fascinating and full of contradictions, and how his philosophy changed over time.
Exactly. And we have to set that against the backdrop of the Napoleonic era, this massive upheaval in Europe. We'll see how individual lives, these really personal, intimately drawn lives, get tangled up with these enormous historical forces.
In Tolstoy's unique way of seeing things, his artistic vision.
Absolutely. And crucially, the lasting impact, how it changed the way we think about books, about history, maybe even about life itself. We're aiming to pull out the key insights, those aha moments from this literary giant, really give you a solid, compelling grasp of it all.
Okay, let's start with the man himself, Leo Tolstoy. What really gets me about him is how his life wasn't just like happening in the background while he wrote. It was the very furnace where his ideas were forged.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
This wasn't some academic tucked away somewhere. He came from aristocracy, yeah, but a family that had its ups and downs financially. His father apparently was quite shrewd in business.
He managed to restore the family fortunes, owning hundreds of serfs, which was just the reality then, and even bought back estates like Nikolskoye Vyazmenskoye and Pierre Bezukhov.
And that reality, owning serfs, being part of that system, it must have profoundly shaped his early views, putting him right up against the social structures he'd later challenged so strongly.
It absolutely did, and those early experiences, they left a huge mark, sometimes a really jarring one. Tolstoy himself talked about this childhood memory, witnessing corporal punishment on his family's estate.
Right, I remember reading about that.
Even though his estate was apparently more humane than many others, he vividly remembered the steward, this guy Andrei Ilyin, taking an assistant coachman named Kuzma off to be flogged.
Oof.
And Tolstoy described the terrible feeling it gave him, especially because Kuzma wasn't a kid, he was a married man. It wasn't just seeing violence, it was seeing the injustice baked into the system, an early glimpse that stuck with him.
And that sensitivity to injustice, that observation of human nature, it really connects to one of his biggest intellectual influences, doesn't it? Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Oh, massively. Rousseau's ideas were radical for the time, condemning civilization for corrupting people, pushing for child-centered education, rejecting organized religion for personal conscience.
Exploring marriage, family life, social equality,
Hmm.
all huge themes for Tolstoy later.
Exactly. And Tolstoy saw the connection. He felt he identified with Rousseau, even saying they shared traits. Genius, yes, but also vanity, maybe even a kind of misguided sincerity. He definitely copied Rousseau's incredibly honest, almost painful self-analysis in his own autobiographical writing. Rousseau laid down some serious groundwork for Tolstoy's thinking.
It almost sounds like those early experiences, like seeing the flogging, kind of primed him for Rousseau's critique of society later on, like he was already questioning things.
That's a really interesting point. Maybe he was predisposed, but Tolstoy's journey didn't end there. Far from it. Later in life, he had this intense spiritual crisis, a conversion, as it's often called.
Right, where he sort of renounced his earlier literary fame.
Pretty much. He said he ceased to regard himself primarily as a writer. He became something else, a prophet and a teacher, people called him. His focus shifted dramatically towards personal and social regeneration.
And that led to a huge amount of writing, didn't it? Not novels, but religious and philosophical stuff.
Immense. The Kingdom of God is Within You is the most famous. Think about this. It's over 13,000 manuscript pages. That's almost as much as War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and Resurrection put together.
Wow, that's staggering.
And it really laid out his radical idea of non-resistance to violence. It shows this huge shift in his life's work, moving beyond just literature into this direct moral and spiritual mission.
Okay, so let's hold that image of this complex, evolving man Tolstoy and zoom out to the world. War and Peace throws us into early 19th century Europe, dominated by the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte.
A period of just massive, earth-shaking change, and Napoleon was right at the heart of it.
his military career was just astonishing, wasn't it? How quickly he rose after the siege of Toulon. He seemed to have this knack for innovative tactics, brilliant strategy right from the start.
Absolutely. Like his famous crossing of the Alps, launching surprise attacks that totally caught his enemies flat-footed, or those early victories at Montenotte, crushing the Piedmontese forces. He was a genuine phenomenon on the battlefield.
You can really see his strategic mind at work. What about specific campaigns?
Well, take the Battle of Marengo, June 1800. Huge moment. His forces were actually outnumbered, nearly defeated, but then reinforcements arrived just in time, perfectly orchestrated through his really effective communication and centralized command structure. It snatched victory from the jaws of defeat.
So it wasn't just luck. He had systems.
He had major advantages: a highly trained, incredibly loyal army, the Grande Armée, efficient communication, swift decision-making because of that centralized command, amazing adaptability in the moment. All this led to really high morale among the troops.
How did that compare to his opponents, say, the Prussians?
Oh, it was a stark contrast. During the 1806 campaign, Prussian leadership was frankly stuck in the past. Outdated tactics, low morale, constant indecision. Napoleon initially had some respect for Prussia's military history, Frederick the Great and all that, but he grew pretty contemptuous of their failures on the battlefield. Maybe underestimated their underlying national spirit, though.
But even Napoleon wasn't infallible. You mentioned his systems, but some big plans backfired, right?
Yeah.
Like the continental system.
Right. That was his big economic play to cripple Britain by blocking trade. Bold idea, but it largely failed. It ended up causing huge hardship for his own allies across Europe, created a lot of resentment, and actually ramped up tensions rather than weakening Britain significantly.
And his strategic goals shifted too, didn't they? Like the move into Poland.
Yeah, that was partly about securing vital winter quarters along the Vistula River, but it was also political, playing on Polish hope for independence to gain support, plus the military advantages of that position. He was always calculating multiple angles.
But ultimately, even his brilliance had limits.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the end game, really. The campaign of 1814 that marked the end of his first reign. He was still tactically brilliant even then, but his support was crumbling. The army, French society. It led to his abdication, the Bourbons coming back.
And then the brief comeback, the 100 Days.
Daring but doomed. And this is the crucial point, circling back to Tolstoy. While we can sit here and analyze Napoleon's military genius, and it was genius, Tolstoy uses War and Peace to fundamentally question this whole great man theory of history.
Right. He's suggesting that even someone as hugely impactful as Napoleon is still, in the end, caught up in these massive, complex forces much bigger than any one person can control.
Exactly. And that's where we really dive into the heart of the novel, moving from that grand historical stage to the intimate personal lives of the characters. Tolstoy's anti-great man idea is woven into the very fabric of the book.
He really believed that the standard way of writing history, focusing just on heroes and leaders, got it fundamentally wrong, didn't he?
He did. He famously argued that historians give too much credit what he called causal efficacy, the power to make things happen to these vague ideas like power or mental activity. For Tolstoy, these were just meaningless terms, empty words, vox nihili, he called it.
Wow, empty words. Harsh.
Yeah, he felt they were just intellectual shortcuts that hid the true mind-boggling complexity of why things happen.
It's such a radical perspective. He thought no science could ever really explain history.
Pretty much. Because the number of tiny causes, individual choices, random events, coincidences, it's just infinite, unknowable, all interconnected. Our understanding, he said, is pathetically ignorant compared to the vast, uncharted, and he really insisted on this unchartable reality.
So how does the novel try to capture that, if you can't chart it?
Well, it attempts to integrate what he called the infinitesimals of history. Tiny, seemingly insignificant moments and choices, but seen through the lives of individual characters. These characters, Pierre, Andrei, Natasha, they aren't trivial precisely because their lives, their actions, their feelings kind of sum up countless other ordinary lives. And it's those lives, all added together, that actually move history.
Okay, so let's see how that plays out, starting with Pierre Bezukhov. He's such a fascinating character right from the start, kind of chaotic, impulsive.
Definitely. His early life is this whirlwind, getting kicked out of Petersburg for riotous conduct, including that crazy story about tying a policeman to a bear. It immediately marks him as an outsider. People look down on him, patronize him because he's illegitimate.
And then he stumbles into that marriage with Helene.
Oh, the disastrous marital blunder. He figures out pretty quickly it would be a calamity, a huge mistake. But he feels trapped, almost pulled into it against his better judgment, partly thanks to Prince Vasily pushing him.
And that leads to more trouble, the duel with Dolokhov.
Right, where society unfairly blames him. It all highlights his social awkwardness, his inability to navigate that world, and it pushes him further into this search for something real, some purpose, which leads him to Freemasonry.
He throws himself into it, right?
Yeah.
Giving away money, going abroad to learn the higher secrets.
He does, though he has doubts about how it's practiced in Russia, feels it's deviating from the principles. He's confused during the initiation ceremony, but feels like he could not stop halfway. There's this feeling of devotion, but he's still kind of grasping, searching for that framework for all his big ideas.
And that search deepens during the war, doesn't it? Especially after Borodino.
Hugely. After seeing the battle, he has this profound realization, this desire to be a soldier, just a soldier, to just enter communal life completely.
He wants to shed his old self, the privilege.
Yeah, what he calls the superfluous, devilish burden of my outer man. It's a rejection of his past. We even see hints of this earlier, thinking about running away or joining the army after the duel. It's a long, simmering desire for something more authentic.
And that dream he has, seeing the soldiers who helped him.
Oh, that's incredibly powerful. Seeing the soldiers, those who had given him food and those who had prayed before the icon, he sees them as strange men he had not previously known. It's this moment of connection, recognizing the humanity of ordinary people, so different from his aristocratic bubble.
It feels like part of his transformation. Even his slightly odd belief later that he's destined to kill Napoleon.
Yeah, that belief in providential predestination. It feels both grand and somehow touchingly naive, part of his ongoing sprawling search for meaning, which remarkably culminates in the epilogue.
In ordinary family life.
Exactly. We see the happy and successful family life of Natasha and Pierre. It's not grand drama. It's discussing disciplining kids and servants, sharing looks, the details of breastfeeding. Tolstoy shows this amazing progression from the sublime to the quotidian, from the huge philosophical quest to the grounded reality of everyday life. That, he seems to say, is where you find real meaning, the new life.
Now let's turn to Andrei Bolkonsky. Very different journey. He starts off quite prickly.
Prickly is a good word, maybe even bitter. There's that icy cruelty towards his wife, Lise. You could maybe explain it by his marital unhappiness, but Tolstoy doesn't excuse it. There's also that sense of artificial and cliched Byronic posing in the high society salons. He seems restless, dissatisfied.
It's driven by ideals, too. Duty, glory.
Oh, definitely. A powerful sense of fate and duty. He eagerly takes assignments with Kutuzov, wants to be where the action is, gets sent with news of victory to the Austrian court. He's chasing something grand.
How does battle change him?
It's transformative, but maybe not how he expected. He sees the huge scale of the French army, feels the cannonade, but then at Schöngrabern, he has this moment of total incomprehension when the enemy actually tries to shoot him. Me, who everybody loves.
It shatters the heroic illusion.
Completely. It shows the impersonal horror of war, and later his personal tragedy, losing Natasha after she breaks her promise. It devastates him. His surroundings become trying. Even his prized freedom and independence feel like a burden.
He loses that sense of possibility.
Totally. He can't think those lofty, infinite thoughts anymore, the ones he had at Austerlitz or on his estate. He actually dreads remembering them. It's like the sky, the canopy of heaven that symbolized possibility, has collapsed into a low, solid vault. A powerful image of being trapped, his spirit crushed.
And his family life isn't much comfort either. His father's cruelty.
Directed mostly at Princess Maria, yeah. And Andrei observes it with this almost malicious cynicism, talking about trash causing misery. It shows his own inner darkness. He's struggling physically with his wound, but also spiritually. He can't weep away his sorrows like women are perhaps allowed to. He keeps it all inside. Maria is deeply worried about his spiritual state.
Which brings us to Natasha Rostova. Such a contrast, especially early on. So much life.
Absolutely. That youthful vivacity just bursts off the page. She loves testing her power over the serfs, who adore her and do whatever she asks. Her anticipation for her first grand ball is just pure, splendid joy. She can hardly believe it's real.
And the ball itself.
She's incandescent, dancing nonstop, completely oblivious to all the political maneuvering happening around her, just lost in the moment. And that lovely detail of her blushing when Andrei mentions overhearing her earlier, it's pure, unself-conscious life.
But her journey gets complicated. The delayed marriage to Andrei.
That hits her hard, shocks her. disrupts her innocent expectations. And then comes the intense struggle between her feelings for the dashing but shallow Anatole and her commitment to Andrei. She feels like Anatole's slave, capable of anything for him, with this pathetic and resolute look on her face. It's a real crisis.
A fall from grace almost.
Yeah.
But she finds redemption.
She absolutely does. Her spiritual resurrection is one of the most moving parts of the novel. When she insists her family casts aside their possessions to make room for the wounded soldiers on their carts during the retreat from Moscow, it's an incredible act of self-sacrifice.
Mirroring the nation's sacrifice.
Exactly. It shows her transformation from that vibrant, maybe slightly naive girl into a woman of deep empathy and strength. Her understanding of love, duty, suffering, it's deepened profoundly.
Okay, let's look at her brother, Nikolai Rostov. His path is different again, duty, family, but also some serious personal flaws.
Yes, the gambling is a major struggle for him. Losing that huge sum, 600 rubles, to Dolokhov. Tolstoy describes him feeling trapped by Dolokhov's physical presence, his broad-boned reddish hands. He even prays to God while gambling, comparing the desperation to being on the battlefield. It shows the immense pressure he's under.
But he has passions too, right? The hunting.
Oh, the hunting scenes are incredible. He rides, reckless of where or how they went, seeing only the borzoi and the hare, and fearing only to lose sight even for an instant of the chase. It's this pure, almost primal escape into action and instinct. A real contrast to his worries.
And his relationships are complicated too, Sonia.
Right. His growing attachment to Sonia, his cousin, who has no fortune. His mother disapproves. She sees Sonia as sweet and devoted, but not a good match financially. But Nikolai feels bound to her, feels a genuine affection.
So he's torn.
Very torn. He feels he should make his mother happy, sort out his father's messy finances, maybe even consider Princess Maria for her fortune. But he's given his plighted word to Sonia. And we also see his temper, his struggle with his position, like when he explodes at the peasants. Arguing, mutiny, scoundrels, traitors. It shows the tensions bubbling under the surface.
And finally, Maria Bolkonskaya. You mentioned her connection to Tolstoy's mother.
Yes, her character, her upbringing, even aspects of her courtship and marriage are closely based on Tolstoy's mother, drawn from her letters and diaries. She's depicted with these beautiful eyes, full of tenderness, even towards Mademoiselle Bourienne, who's clearly trying to snatch Anatole.
Despite her father's awful treatment.
Her devotion to him is remarkable, despite his cruelty. She submits to being dressed up by Lise and Mademoiselle Bourienne, showing this incredible piety, patience, and self-sacrifice. She's very dutiful.
And she steps into a maternal role.
She does, with her little nephew, Prince Nikolai, trying to be a mother to him. But she's deeply distressed about her brother Andrei's state, both physical and spiritual. She begs him to go abroad for treatment, fearing his quiet, withdrawn life is harming him.
She seems quite isolated.
Very much so. She finds her friend Julie quite alien, Mademoiselle Bourienne unpleasant. She struggles with irritability herself, especially when teaching her nephew, worrying she's becoming like her difficult father. Yet, despite all this, she shows this real warmth and affection towards Pierre, treating him as of a brother. It highlights her capacity for genuine connection beneath the surface piety.
So we have these rich character journeys.
Yeah.
What about the actual historical figures? How does Tolstoy portray them? Kutuzov, for instance.
Kutuzov is fascinating. He's not presented as a heroic, dashing general. More shrewd and experienced, pragmatic. He accepts the need to fight at Borodino, even though the army is seriously depleted after losing the Shevardino redoubt.
But his critics see him differently.
Yeah, they dismiss him as a decrepit, blind old man, but he is the commander-in-chief appointed by the Tsar. Tolstoy portrays him as having this quiet wisdom and almost passive acceptance of fate, rather than trying to impose his will on events through grand strategies. It fits perfectly with Tolstoy's view of history.
And Count Rostopchin, the governor of Moscow.
Rostopchin is shown returning to Moscow, mortified and offended after meeting Kutuzov, finding the army's attitude totally alien to him. We see his internal turmoil, his attempts to justify his actions during the burning of Moscow. He convinces himself he's sacrificing the city pour le bien public, for the public good. It's a complex look at leadership under pressure and the ways people rationalize difficult choices.
Okay, so we've walked through these individual lives, seen glimpses of the historical figures through Tolstoy's eyes. How do all these threads weave together into the big picture? Let's talk about the major themes. Maybe start with the most obvious one, war versus peace.
Right. It's the title, after all. And Tolstoy draws this contrast so powerfully, so viscerally. He juxtaposes the sheer chaos, the terror, the utter confusion of battle with the rhythms of ordinary domestic life, of family.
Battle scenes are just Intense.
Unforgettable. You almost hear the soul-stirring rolling and crackling of musketry. You feel the panic in the dark where you can't even tell uniforms apart. Hear the soldiers' desperate cries. He captures the absurdity of it, the way generals' plans just fall apart in the face of reality, the fog of war, simple human error.
Like Nikolai Rostov at Schöngribern.
Exactly. That moment of total incomprehension. They want to kill me who everybody loves. It drives home how bewildering and personal combat is for the soldier caught up in it. It's not abstract. It's terrifyingly real and seems utterly unfair.
And then he shifts gears completely.
Instantly, to these incredibly intimate domestic scenes, the Rostovs getting ready for the day, Natasha lost in the joy of the dance, and later in the epilogue, those quiet moments talking about raising children, the shared glances between Natasha and Pierre, even breastfeeding.
It's such a deliberate contrast.
It really is. Tolstoy takes us from these epic battles, hundreds of thousands of lives in the balance, right down to the colicky burp of a baby. It's this deliberate progression from the sublime to the quotidian. He's showing us, I think, that real life, real meaning, authentic peace isn't found in the grand sweep of history or war, but in these seemingly small, everyday human connections and experiences.
And exploring where meaning lies connects directly to another huge question Tolstoy wrestles with: free will versus determinism.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the philosophical pillars of the novel. Are we really in charge of our choices shaping history, or are we just, pawns being moved by forces we don't even understand?
Tolstoy had a pretty strong view on this, didn't he?
He did. He argued quite forcefully that freedom of the will is an illusion, a persistent illusion. One we can't shake off, he admitted, but an illusion nonetheless. And he believed it stems purely from ignorance of true causes.
Ignorance of true causes. What did he mean?
His thinking was, the more you understand about all the circumstances leading up to an action and all the consequences flowing from it, the less free that action seems. It starts to look inevitable, determined by everything that came before.
Which ties back to his anti-great man theory.
Exactly. Even in Napoleon, a supposed shaper of destiny is ultimately just a product of these huge, unchartable forces, not the sole driver. Tolstoy was really critical of historians for picking facts randomly, based on their own biases, to create neat narratives of cause and effect. He said true history is made by the infinitesimals, those countless tiny individual actions and thoughts that add up, like atoms, to create historical trends. It's not driven by abstract concepts like power or lone heroes.
But if free will is an illusion, that raises some massive questions, doesn't it? About responsibility, about morality.
Huge questions. If our actions are determined, what does that mean for praise or blame? For our sense of ourselves as agents in the world? Tolstoy doesn't necessarily give easy answers, but he forces you to confront the possibility.
And in a world where individual agency might be limited, how do people find purpose? That leads us to the theme of the search for meaning.
Yes, and it plays out so differently in each character. Pierre and Andrei especially are on these epic quests. Pierre tries everything: dissipation, Freemasonry, later this intense desire to be a soldier, just a soldier, to enter communal life completely, shedding that burden of my outer man he's constantly seeking.
While Andrei starts with these high ideals of glory and service,
Only to have them shattered by the reality of war at Austerlitz. His search for those lofty, infinite horizons later collapses into that low, solid vault after his personal tragedies. His spiritual restlessness is almost painful to read. It shows that meaning isn't just handed to you, it's forged in the often brutal process of living, suffering, and surviving.
and Natasha, her path is different again.
Hers is more about transformation through love, through suffering, and ultimately through self-sacrifice. That spiritual resurrection, when she prioritizes the wounded soldiers over her family's belongings, that's where she finds a deeper, more profound meaning. These journeys show there's no single path, it's often difficult, and the answers aren't simple.
Another really sharp critique in the novel is aimed at society itself, the contrast between authenticity and artificiality.
Oh, Tolstoy is ruthless on this. He skewers the pretense of high society. Think of Anna Pavlovna's salon, those first scenes. It's all about performance, saying the right thing, social maneuvering. Or Helene with her calculated charm used purely for gain. Prince Vasily constantly scheming for his children's advancement. It's a world of facades.
Built on convention rather than real feeling.
Exactly. And then he contrasts that sharply with moments of raw, genuine emotion or action, often happening outside those formal settings.
Like Natasha at the ball.
Perfect example. Her pure, uninhibited joy. Or Pierre's search for truth. He's often awkward, clumsy, even ridiculous in society's eyes. but he's genuinely grappling with big questions. Even the simple, unvarnished courage of ordinary soldiers facing death feels more real, more authentic than the calculated performances in the salons.
It really underscores his belief that true life, real meaning, is found away from all that superficiality.
Definitely. He suggests you have to strip away the layers of convention to get to something real.
And all these themes really culminate in his radical view of history, that anti-great man theory we touched on. It's so central.
It's absolute fundamental. He wasn't just suggesting it, he was hammering it home. History isn't made by Napoleon or Kutuzov issuing orders. It's made by the sum total of countless individual decisions, movements, feelings, the collective will, almost unconscious of the masses.
And he thought historians just papered over this complexity.
He accused them of inventing non-existent entities like power or heroes because the reality was too messy, too complex to grasp. He felt they were always biased, shaping the narrative to fit their own national or philosophical leanings.
He even went so far as to call figures like Napoleon transgressors, didn't he?
He did, not heroes, but transgressors. People like Lycurgus, Muhammad, Napoleon lawgivers, founders. He argued they achieved their aims by breaking old laws and shedding blood for their own advantage. He had this chilling line suggesting many of these supposed benefactors were particularly bloodthirsty. It's a complete inversion of the traditional view of leadership.
And that famous quote about battles being lost because people believe they are lost.
Right. Que c'est une bataille perdue. C'est une bataille qu'on croit avoir perdue. Victory isn't just about troop numbers or positions. It's a moral or psychological issue. It challenges the idea of objective military history, suggesting perception and morale are paramount.
This makes me think of that famous Isaiah Berlin essay, The Fox versus the Hedgehog idea, applied to Tolstoy.
Ah, yes. It's a brilliant framework. Berlin argued Tolstoy was, by nature, a fox, someone who knows many things, who sees the world in all its complex, contradictory, detailed reality. His descriptive power is pure fox capturing the messiness of life.
But he wanted to be a hedgehog.
Exactly. He yearned for the hedgehog's trait, knowing one big thing. He longed for a single, unifying truth, a grand theory that could explain everything, tie all the messy details together into one coherent vision.
But could he ever actually articulate that big truth?
That's the paradox. Berlin suggests, and I think it's right, that Tolstoy's genius lies in showing us everything that the truth is not. He's devastatingly destructive, tearing down all the false explanations, the simplistic theories, the illusions. He can only point towards the ultimate truth by meticulously exposing all the falsehoods.
So he clears the ground, shows us the illusions.
He clears the ground. He shows us, with unparalleled power, that the truth isn't found in science, or art as conventionally understood, or rational analysis alone. He halts at the border, unable to fully describe the promised land in our everyday language, but he leaves us in no doubt that all the usual maps are wrong. It's a profound, almost mystical view of the limits of human understanding.
And that philosophical depth directly informs his literary style, doesn't it? The sheer scale.
Astounding, that panoramic scope. He moves seamlessly from epic events like the burning of Moscow involving thousands down to the most intimate thoughts and feelings of a single character, sometimes in the same paragraph. Virginia Woolf nailed it when she said great novels make you think of all sorts of things. Tolstoy embodies that breadth like few others.
And the psychological realism is just incredible.
Especially in the families. That detailed dissection of marital and family problems really paved the way for Anna Karenina, which focuses even more intensely on those domestic dynamics. He gets inside people's heads, reveals their motivations, their insecurities with such precision.
His descriptive power is legendary, too. You feel like you're there.
Absolutely. Whether it's the horror of Moscow burning that specific image of the woman's earrings being torn off while a child is trapped, or just the feeling of troops marching on a hot, dusty road. He uses sensory details, movement, light, sound. It's incredibly vivid.
And the way he uses contrast, like the dark carriage opening onto the bright ballroom.
Masterful. Those contrasts aren't just stylistic flourishes, they underscore the themes. The gap between private suffering and public show, between the inner world and societal expectations. It creates emotional depth and highlights the novel's core tensions.
But then there are those philosophical digressions, especially in the epilogues. They've always been controversial.
Hugely controversial. Critics at the time, and even some later, just didn't know what to make of them. They felt they broke the narrative flow, called them an aberration, even a swamp, just these dense philosophical essays dropped into the novel.
But you're saying they're actually key to understanding Tolstoy's project.
I think they are. They connect directly to his later aesthetic theory, spelled out in What is Art? For him, art wasn't about beauty or form. It was about infectiousness. Did it successfully transmit the artist's genuine emotion to the audience, making them feel what the artist felt?
That was his main criterion.
Pretty much his only criterion. And he believed good art had to be universal, understood by everyone, a view some called winsomely naive, given his own sophisticated background. But this conviction led him to reject a lot of famous art, even his own earlier work and Shakespeare.
Because it didn't meet his moral standard.
Exactly. He believed the aesthetic is the expression of the ethical. Art had to convey sincere, morally sound feeling. So those digressions in War and Peace aren't just footnotes. They are Tolstoy actively engaging in that devastatingly destructive project we talked about, tearing down what he saw as false understandings of history and human life, forcing the reader to confront his philosophical arguments head-on. It's part of the novel's core mission.
Which helps explain why War and Peace has had such an enduring impact, why it's still considered such a timeless classic.
It really does. The themes just resonate across time and cultures. We're still grappling with war and peace, free will, the search for meaning. These are universal human experiences.
Its relevance feels very contemporary sometimes.
Absolutely. That exploration of conflict, the human cost of war, it feels incredibly relevant looking at global conflicts today. And that idea of the duality of human existence.
How we're both individuals making choices and yet somehow part of larger historical currents.
Precisely. That tension feels very modern. And the personal search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming, that hasn't gone away. The novel keeps challenging our easy assumptions about heroism, about agency, about what really matters.
And his ideas influence people far beyond just literature, right? Like Strindberg.
Oh, yeah. The playwright August Strindberg was profoundly affected. Tolstoy's radical ethics, his critique of culture, it apparently led Strindberg to literally declare war on culture and try to live like a peasant himself for a time.
Wow, he actually did it.
He tried. It shows the sheer life-altering power Tolstoy's ideas could have, especially that controversial religious and ethical system he developed later in life. It shaped his own final decades and left a complex, powerful legacy.
So after this whole journey, this deep dive into War and Peace, what's the final takeaway? What does it leave us with?
I think it fundamentally forces us to question what we mean by truth. Truth in history, truth in our own lives. If Tolstoy is right, if the deepest truths are somehow beyond what art or science or rational thought can fully capture, then what does that say about our constant search for definitive answers, for neat explanations? Maybe, just maybe, true peace isn't found in having all the answers, but somewhere else entirely. In the living, in the experiencing, in the connections we forge on our own messy, epic journeys. It's a question the novel leaves hanging in the air, challenging you long after you finish reading.